Hello everyone and welcome to Fuse Room. I'm Alberto. In this video we're going to talk about Burnley73 by Sonimus. So after you asked me about it, I went on a mission to find the 1073 emulation plugin that is inexpensive, sounds great, has all of the features that we can find on the original unit, from filter to preamp to all of the stepped frequencies and whatnot, that had a sound that responded to how I expected a 1073 to sound, even if they're all different with their makes, their ear, how they were maintained. It's one of the units that has the least consistent, I think, builds, given the ears and how they were used. Also, it had to be light on CPU, but had, again, to sound great and be versatile for us to use whenever we want. Because when we think 1073, we think about something that is sitting in a studio and can be used at any time on anything, because it just sounds fantastic. So I came back from this mission with Burnley73 by Sonimus. Full disclosure, Sonimus watched the video and noticed how I do music education programs online completely for free, 100%, and decided to help me out by supporting the channel. So if you purchase these plugin or other Sonimus plugins through my referral code, this channel and its free videos are going to get supported financially by Sonimus. So now you know that if you end up buying this, use my referral code, because it's gonna keep the channel alive and make sure that more videos like this happen. Before we start, let's take a look at what a 1073 is. It's a preamp EQ unit that was developed by Neve in the 70s, and it was meant to be part of their consoles. It was never meant to be an independent unit. It later on became such because people were, taking them apart and using them and reframing them and re-racking them so that they could use single units or pairs, or more. I think it comes from 1970 or something like that. Neve had this company called Neve Electronics since the 60s. This is before the merging with another company, and it's one of the most authentic and 100% Rupert Neve genius infused units. So a lot of engineers think of the 1073 as one of the main staples of music production in terms of a preamp and in terms of an equalizer. Let's take a look at how Burnley73 behaves without, going into music. Let's send a signal through it and let's take a look at what it does. As you can see, the interface is pretty simple. We have the high pass filter on the left, then we have the low shelf with the selectable frequencies. They're all stepped, the frequencies, the gain isn't. Then we have a mid bell or peak, which has stepped frequencies again, and variable gain. And then we have a fixed high shelf, very famous on this unit. It's at 12K and it sits there. It's not stepped, but you cannot change the frequency. Then we have this red knob, which is the preamp. On Burnley73, it emulates the line or mic preamp. This is because you could send line signals through it, you could send microphone inputs through it, and there's a lot of re-racking variations of it. But generally, you go counterclockwise and you engage line type saturation, and you go clockwise and you engage microphone type saturation. So obviously, line is a bit milder and mic is a bit more, intense. At the very end of it, we have the output trim with up to +16 and -24. On the bottom, we have show labels, which allow us to see the values in dBs for all of these parameters. We can flip phase and we can engage or disengage the EQ. When EQ in is on, when it's lit in yellow, orange, everything is operational. But when we disengage EQ in and it grays out, we only use preamp and, just the mojo of the unit without the actual parameters. So this is also a great way to get just the saturation that you might want, or to bypass the EQ to hear, to A/B what you're really doing. But you can also bypass the single bands if you click on their symbols. When they turn red, they go off. So you see that by the time I turn this thing on, even if it's fully flat with the preamp set at off, we do have quite a curve. We are, shaving some extreme lows, getting a little bit of a bump around 480, 4,800, 5K, and then we're going slowly down to 20 kilohertz. So there's a bit of a high pass, a bit of a low pass, even if the unit is completely on. Just take a look, that's a 50 hertz, 20 hertz, so we're getting approximately -6 at like probably 8 hertz. This behavior of the filters is 100% responding to how a lot of equipment does. You cannot expect to go fully flat to 0 hertz, because that's not how analog usually would work unless you want things to explode. So now we engage the EQ and we can move the filter, and you see how it's shaped. Notice how weirder the 160 and 300 are, and this is part of why they sound the way they do. Well, we can disengage the filter, as I said, independently. Then we have the shelf, the low one, we have the high one, and we have the selectable frequencies for the mid band, right? That's pretty normal. So I'm gonna reset these, and I'm gonna try and see what happens when I move towards line level saturation. You see, there's slight gentle bumps and changes in the lows, mostly at around 100. And then when I go to the mic level, the curve shapes itself a lot. So when I move the saturation towards mic, you see that when I reach 60, the shape is completely different. However, we have a minimum of -10 dB. So it is extreme, but it looks way more than it sounds, although it sounds pretty cool and saturated in the microphone. Then we go with the output, which is pretty linear. So this would be sort of a trimmer. Doesn't kind of look like it's changing that much, which might be a good thing. So if we go to the harmonic content, we're sending a 1 kilohertz sine at -18 dBFS through the plugin, and we can start, just handling the filter. Pretty much nothing changes that much, right? Obviously we are now boosting 1.6 or 700, so our curves are interacting with the core frequency of our sine. Same thing, even if slightly with the high pass. What happens if I engage the preamp? So you see that when I go to line, we see the harmonics kicking in, and when I go to mic, you see a lot of noise and a lot of harmonics. So that's a sign of a genuine emulation, and we'll hear it. That's how it's supposed to work, So when I move the output, which is the last thing that I had left, we have a pretty linear, very clean, I would say, output stage. So this concludes our analysis of the plugin. Now let's move to the mixing phase. Here we have a song that I haven't mixed, but I had fun using Burnley73 on pretty much every track. Now, there is outboard in this session that is being used as parallel sends. There's reverbs, there's compression, distortion and stuff, but we're not gonna take a look at it. The reason for this is that I wanted a real world session. So I took some parts of my template for mixing in hybrid and I decided to use it. Now, every move we make with Burnley73 is going to get into this sort of mixing environment, but that's how it would be. It's still very realistic, and I'm sure you're gonna be able to hear what the plugin does, even if there is this more sort of complex behavior of the mixing matrix, because that's how you would call it. So I propose we listen to the song from the first verse into somewhere around the end. Let's just get a vibe of how things sound in its present state with Burnley73 on and with everything else going on.
Far away, but I feel you sometimes. I work like a dog and I save every dime. Still a year or two till I see you again. Is it money or decision or just faith in the end? I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, but if you wait, I'll come along. Oh, I know you now. Will I know you when the money comes in and we have found ourselves? Do we?
So let's take a look at the drums first and, highlight some of the more interesting Burnley73 moves that I've done. We have kick, snare, top and bottom, hi-hat, floor, shaker, 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 tambourine, ride, 2 overheads and 1 room mic. Then I have an all kick drums, a bass, even if I have just 1 kick, an old snares, even if I have top and bottom, and then the overheads combined into a stereo track. So I think the most interesting part is to hear like the chorus without these Burnleys there on the kick, snare and overheads, because that's probably gonna make a lot of difference already. So without and then with. There's a lot of difference and there's a lot of behavior of color that I've decided to use. So you see it's a lot lighter than it was before. There's a lot of atmosphere that one can take out in whatever. Obviously this was done in context. So if we take the kick drum, for example, just by itself, you're gonna hear that there's so much that one can do, and something that people like to use the 1073s on is definitely kick drums. So let's copy the settings so that I can get back to it, and let's hear how the kick drum originally sounded. And now let's hear how it sounds with the 1073. So here you see I shaved the 50s off, but then I went on the 60 Hertz and then went quite up. Then I carved a lot of 360 and just boosted all the way up the 12K and went into the mic saturation and went for 40. Then I compensated the output. So what happens is, let's try and just get it, to a point where nothing is being used and all flat, and let's try and rebuild this. Right? So you hear how much this is doing. So now let's go to the overheads, again, without and with. Massive difference. Again, let's play with the fact that everything goes to normal and let's try and build a sound for it. Now, what I would do is I would still have my kicks and snares in, just because it makes 0 sense for me to go, in absolute terms with the overheads. I usually never do them out of context, as you know, but we're testing things out. So sometimes we're gonna break this rule. Let's try and get a sound for the overheads, just so that you can see how the knobs react. And here I want to stop because it's very important for me to underline that because the overheads have such a kit vision of it. Have you heard how the kit is actually sounding fantastic from these two overheads without adding too much, just the kick and snare? Sometimes we super mic everything. We do multiple positions of the kick and stuff. You hear how the 60 hertz here do not actually go and butter the frequencies on the kick that I have. It's actually pretty interactive. I even blended in a little bit more 360 because the snare I have, the direct sound is kind of dehydrated in a way. It feels as if I had a 1073 in front of me, where you just go, crank, and find interactions, and it's just a very musical experience. It shouldn't be analytical too much. It should feel good first. That's the beauty of these units, in my opinion. That's why a lot of people love them. What is it, like 60 years after? Yeah, something like that. I think that EQ in function is incredibly important because it gain stages things evenly. So we take the EQ part out, but we don't take the preamp section out and the staging of all the components. So we're not fooled by loudness that much. We're just trying to hear what the EQ does. And they're two beautiful sounds. In this case, just speaking of interaction, something that I want to transfer to you is, you notice how I'm cutting 160 and I'm boosting 110. The reason for this is that the carve gets shaped, as I said. There's an interaction between knobs that are close together, and sometimes obviously the balance spreads apart from knobs that are very far apart. So when you want to offset some lows with highs and vice versa, you can do that. And the peak frequency in the middle is this pivot point that rebalances the sound. It's very natural. You'll find out that it's kind of effortless in a way. All right, now let's move to bass, without and with. There's a tightness in the bass, sort of as if I were to compress this thing with a compressor, but I am actually not. So this is typical of the transformers and the stuff that just is across the path. And I think it's a very sought after function because it just locks bass in, and especially the lowest extreme frequencies. So as usual, let's reset this, hear how things sounded originally, and let's tinker with the parameters so that you can hear how the EQ reacts. Even the 360 alone, which is a frequency that a lot of people tend to say, oh, it's where you cut, it's where you cut, it's where you cut. You don't just cut because the frequency is bad. There's no, violence to be taken upon frequencies just because of their numbers. They're all equal. It depends on the context. So 300 hertz usually on bass is a fantastic frequency, and it's no exception on a 1073 with a 360. So the reason why I'm restoring all the parameters to what they used to be even if I think that sometimes I'm finding sounds that I like better than what I had, is because we're listening out of context. So it doesn't make any sense. I want to keep things as they were, because when we move to the mix bus, you're gonna hear how cool this sound. Another thing I want to do is acoustic guitars. These are two acoustic guitar tracks on the sides, and they have both a Burnley73 on them. So let's hear them without and then with. So obviously I'm carving a lot of stuff. Let's do the same trick we were doing before. Let's reset these. There's no link function for the two plugins, so I'm gonna have to do it the old school way. Two plugins, two units, and we're gonna mimic the same move on one and the other. Sometimes I might get different settings that actually work better. You heard how this cleans things up very discreetly. It's not always an EQ that just gets in and says, this is my sound and you're gonna get my sound no matter how beautiful it is, it's what I decide. This is very mild. And have you noticed how keeping both of them together and moving them differently and just reacting to these two things as if they were one just made the sound a little less coherent? The soundstage opened up, in my opinion, a bit better, and it sounds great. I haven't used filters because I really like the lows on it. Let's try and see. The reason I want to try this is that if I put the bass in, have you heard how musical the 80 Hertz is? It's kind of not light. It's an 18 dB per octave at 80 Hertz. It's going to carve a lot of those lows, but it does that very respectfully of the material that we're sending into it. So I'm curious to hear how these 80 Hertz sounds when filtered out of the acoustic guitars with the bass, because by themselves, I actually wouldn't, cut the lows. But when we have bass, we might find that the two bass and guitars elements kind of live better together. Let's try this. Let's put it on 8, put the bass in, and let's bypass just the filter. It works, just as expected. Trust me, I haven't tried these, but I knew it would work just by how I heard the lows cleaning up with the single filters without hearing the bass. I think we pretty much have everything else here going on. I want to let you hear the vocals. The electric guitars might be cool, but I want to go vocals first. So this is the vocals without the EQ and then with.
I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, but if you wait, I'll come along.
So what you heard was gain compensated because I'm also adding a lot of output gain. So let's try another, comparison without and with the EQ in, which is gonna gain stage for us.
I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, but if you wait, I'll come.
This way, we're actually feeding the basses with kind of the same gain values, and we're just focusing on how the EQ sounds. And you hear how it cleans things up. Let's try and, again, copy and do, a test run of the vocal.
I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true.
You hear how it breaks up? It's just great, and it could be used as a saturation tool in parallel. It could be a cool idea. So let's back it off because I don't need that much. I have dedicated distortion things, which are just gonna be too much then.
I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, but if you wait, I'll come along. I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, but if you wait, I'll come along.
Hear how cutting 160 and boosting 220 actually gives the vocal a little more body, in a more sort of like a record way. And the 7.2 kilohertz is kind of weird, but has that vintage kind of vibe to it. Sometimes I like to do the opposite, so we're gonna go backwards here in the low mids, and then we're gonna try and boost maybe a little bit more highs. Let's try it.
I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, but if you wait, I'll come along.
It's just great how it just polishes it and sends it out in a more sort of like beautiful record kind of sounding way. So let's try just for kicks the electric guitars. They don't do much. There's a lot more here, so let's try this section. I think I have it on the 6 of the 8 tracks, but that's gonna be kind of enough for us to test. It's like as if it was a balloon that we give a kid, and it's when it's on, the balloon is new and it's flashy and it's red and it's beautiful and it's, it flies up there and the kid is all happy. And when we just turn them off, it just doesn't explode away, but it kind of becomes a little more soft, right? And it's not, maybe it stayed on the sun a bit too much or something like that. That's my feeling, like a shiny red balloon, beautiful soundstage of the guitars versus, it's been a week in the sun. Sort of. I mean, they still sound great, but it's just so much better with. So now let's listen to the full mix, which has a mix bus with an SSL bass compressor and 2 EQs. And we've been listening to them all along. But now we're gonna compare without the EQs, and I'm gonna turn on Burnley73 with these settings. Let's hear how the two sounds and compare.
I know love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along. Love happens in its own time. I know that you gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong, and if you wait, I'll come along with you. Love happens in its own comes in its own time. I know that we gotta stay true. I know there's a place where you belong.
So you heard the difference. Does it fear the comparison? Absolutely no. I know some of you might like one, some of you might like the other. I'm not here to comment, but the bottom line is this is super cool. And this concludes my video. I hope that all the things we've tinkered with and the ideas that I've expressed have motivated you to make your music sound even better than it already does. These Burnley73 sounds and feels to me the way I remembered 1073s to feel and sound when I had them in front of me when I learned to mix. And it's a great feature. It makes mixing so effortless and fun, which is the thing that these magical units have in them. So as usual, see you next time. Ciao.